So we're going to now customize Devise and add a few attributes to the podcast model. So if we go back to the planning document and look at the modeling our data section, under podcasts, we'll have email, password. These were already taken care of from Devise, but we need to manually add a title, description, thumbnail. We're going to leave out for now because that's going to be handled through paperclip when we get to the image uploading. We also want to add an episode count, iTunes link, Stitcher link, and a Podbay link. So we are going to do that by running a migration. So to add a migration, let's do Rails generate migration. We are going to do add attributes to podcasts, and let's just list out those attributes now. So we have a title, which is going to be a string. Then we have the description, which is going to be a text area. So description text. Let's go back. In addition, let's add iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbay link. So I will write iTunes, and that's going to be a string. Stitcher, it's going to be a string, and Podbay, that will be a string. All right, so make sure I got this correct. Add or Rails generate migration, add attributes to podcast, and the attributes are title, which is a string, description, which is text, iTunes string, Stitcher string, Podbay string. Let's hit enter. And before we do before we migrate that into our database, let's do Sublime, paste in that file path, and open that up. Just check it out. So what this is doing, this migration, it's doing a def change. It's adding a column to the podcast table, and that column is going to be title, which is going to be a string, and the same is for all the other ones. So this looks good to me. So what I will do is do rake db:/migrate. All right, so that adds all the columns to our model. The next thing we need to do is add these to our form. So let's go into Sublime Text and close this out, close out the index. Let's go ahead and go under App Views Devise and Registrations. Let's do Edit. So if we go to our localhost and I just do /podcast/edit, since I'm signed in, it will go to my edit page, and I have email, password confirmation, and as you can see, there's email right here, password confirmation. So this is the correct page. So what we want to do is copy this first off. Let's delete the autofocus true, and then up here, let's paste that in. Let's change this to title. Let's add another one, change it to description. And if you notice under db migrate, all of these attributes are lining up with the migration that we just did. The title, description, and then we'll do one for iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbay. So title, I'll leave email right there, and then I'll come under here. I'm going to add an H2 and say links, and then I'll add another field, change this to iTunes, and then remove autofocus true. Let's do the same thing for Stitcher. And same thing for Podbay. And one thing I noticed that I messed up on just now is this actually should not be a email field. Let's change this to a text field. The description should be a text_area. And then iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbay, those should all be text fields as well. So if I go back and refresh, you can see those are now added to the edit page. So if I try to add a title, for example, say the Rocket Ship Podcast. And I go enter my password, because you need to enter your password to confirm the changes. Enter the password, hit update. It says your account has successfully been updated, but if I go back to /podcast/edit, you can see it's not saved. With Rails 4's strong parameters, we need to say what is permitted and what is not. But since this is a device, we need to set up things a little bit differently. What we're going to do is go under App Controllers and the Application Controller. We're going to drop down a few lines. We're going to add a before filter, and it's going to be configure permitted parameters if : Devise controller ? And then let's add a protected, and then let's define what the def configure permitted parameters is. Parameters. I misspelled that. I'm gonna copy this just so it's spelled the same way. Permitted params, that looks like it's spelled correctly. And then I'll end that. So what we need to do is devise parameter. If I could spell parameter, _sanitizer.for. And what we're doing this for is the account _update, which is the edit page. So what we're going to do is u, and then u.permit, and then in parentheses we'll do email. We have to permit all of the attributes, so password confirmation, current password. We'll also do a title, description, iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbay. So if I go back and refresh, let's try to enter the Rocket Ship Podcast, and then enter my password. Hit update. Account successfully been updated. Let's go see if it actually worked. Podcast/edit. Whoops, edit. All right, and now you can see that attribute was saved to our model. Let's go ahead and add a description and the links as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new file, and I'm just going to open up our static HTML. I'm going to copy the description we had here, and then close it, paste that in. Then for the links, I'm just going to add a stubbed out link for now. And then we'll hit update, and let's go back and confirm. Podcasts/edit. Beautiful. So that is all. That is working correctly. But what about when a user signs up? So say localhost. So say if I do an incognito window, go to localhost and create a podcast, there's still only the email and the password. But what if I want the user to add a title when they sign up? Well, to do that, we'd go under App, Views, Devise, Registrations, and New. And what I'll do is I'll just copy this field, and I will paste that in here. And let's remove the autofocus true from email. Save that. Now if I go back and refresh, the title is here. But again, just like before, we have to permit the parameters. So what we're going to do is copy that, and instead of for account update, what it's going to be for is sign_up. So what we're permitting is the email, the password confirmation, and then we don't need current password or any of the other stuff except for title. So let's test signing up. Let's do Narwhal's podcast. I'll say test at test.com, enter password. You've successfully signed up. Now if I go to /podcast/edit, you can see that the Narwhal's podcast was saved along with the other attributes. So this is perfect. So let's go ahead and go back to our terminal, do a git status. Let's do a git add dot get s Now let's do a git commit -am. Let's say added attributes to Devise podcast. Okay, so one last thing I want to do before we move on to the next video is it is bugging me like crazy that this is pushed up against the edge. So let's fix how that's laid out right now. So if we open up a static page and open up the sign in, for example, the sign up page should look something like this. So let's style it to where it looks a lot nicer. So let's go back to localhost and let's go to the edit page. Actually, let's go to the new one and do that first. So I'm going to bring in our sign up static file, and I'll copy over this div ID banner. So let's close that, paste it in, and if I go back and refresh, whoops, let me go to my incognito window and go back. Let me sign out. All right, create a podcast. So inspect element, it should be showing up. So it is, except the image is not showing up. Oh, and that is because, well, it'd be easier if I had this. I'm going to bring in the podcast static files into Sublime. Let me clean this up a bit so we have more room to work with. All right, so let me see under app. Oops, close the views, assets, style sheets. We did not yet copy over those styles from we did copy those over. So the issue is in our application.css.scss, these file paths are not correct. So what we need to do is change this to image-url, and then let's change it from the image path. All right, so image URL and then the name of the file. Save that. Now if I go back and refresh, there we go. But the header is not showing up on this page, so let's take care of that next. Let me open up the sign up page. Let me copy this header. And what I'm going to do is go to our application layout, app views, layouts, application.html.erb. And then let's add it below the notice and alert. So this is going to be on every page. Refresh. That looks great. So now we have the links. Let's be sure to change the links though. So instead of a href, this is going to be a link to, and we're going to link to podcast.fm, and then we're going to go to the root path. And then let's also add an ID of logo. All right, and let's open up the welcome index. And we want this same conditional. So I'm going to copy this over, go under the UL, and let's paste that in. So once we add the podcast controller and views, we'll change this link. And then once we add the dashboard, we'll change this link. But for now, this is good. Let's save that and refresh. Since we're not signed in, we see this. If I go back, refresh, I'll see the regular one. Perfect. Okay, so now we need to make sure it's within the wrapper. So if I go to the sign up page, or the static page, whoops, we did not style that. So the sign in static page, we have the idea form, and then it's inside of a wrapper skinny. So I'm going to copy that. I'll just close it out. So let's add all of this inside of that. So ID of form, a wrapper skinny. So I'm going to select everything, tab it over twice to indent it, and then let's add the two closing divs. Save that, refresh. All right, we don't need the sign up H2 because we have Create a Podcast. It's 100% free. So let's get rid of that. That's looking great. Let's add the button right here. First, I want to remove this link, and then let's add a class to the button. Say class of button underscore highlight and button block. Refresh. Beautiful. Let's do the edit page as well. So in our static pages, let's go to the dashboard.html. So we already have the header in our application file. Let's copy all of this stuff. Let's copy from the podcast show ID to the closing links just before the episodes. And then we'll go to the edit. All right, and let's make sure that's indented correctly. So if I go back and refresh, we get the Rocket Ship podcast and the links are showing up. Let's grab the styles for that. So I'm going to create a new style sheet, save this as podcasts.css.scss. Then let's go to the podcasts SCSS, copy that, close it, paste it in. And then go to your application.css and let's import podcasts. Go back and refresh. Beautiful. Now that's all styled correctly. So how we're going to do this is right now we are on the account settings page. So if I go, let me close out of the CSS and application controller and the new, let's go back to the edit file. So the current link class should be on the account settings right now. And we're actually going to change these to be dynamic. These two we'll leave as is, but this one we can change right now. Equals a link to _2 account settings. And if we go back to our terminal and do rake routes. So the path we want is the edit podcast registration path. So the podcast /edit, which we were going to. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in, append _path, and then delete the rest of the ahref. So if I save that, go back and refresh. Let's make sure it's got the class of current. Oh, you know what? We need to tweak this a bit. So the li shouldn't have the class of current. So let's delete that. Instead, the link to should have the class of current. So I'll add class : current. Beautiful. Now let's take care of this ugly form. So let's go back to the new. I'm going to grab this idea form and the wrapper skinny and put everything here around that as well. So I'm going to delete the edit because we don't need to see that. Let's tab this in and add the closing divs. Save and refresh. Much better. All right, let's delete that backlink because we don't want that anymore. Then let's change the update and add those classes. Class button underscore highlight and button block. Perfect. This looks great. All right, so let's go back to our terminal, do a git status, and let's do a git add dot git s. Let's do a git commit -am, and we'll add the message styled sign up and account settings forms. All right, now let's do a git push, and also let's push this to Heroku. Git push Heroku master. All right, again, since we have tweaked the database, we need to do a Heroku run rake db:/migrate to migrate the Heroku database. All right, and now if we go to the podcast.fm Heroku app, let's save or sign up. Let's go to the let's go to /podcasts/edit. Cool, that's looking good. And let's test out that we can save the Rocket Ship podcast. Let's grab it from here, paste that in, and let's put stubs for these links for now. Add a password, or add our password, update, and let's go back to /podcast/edit. Beautiful. All right, if you noticed, there is duplicate headers now. We will take care of that in a future video. But in the next video, we are going to set up the podcast controller and views in order to loop through all the podcasts on our Explore page.